Hi there, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the second video in the restoration of this Philips 148. As you probably recall, if you saw the first video, I was looking for tubes and I asked you for help and you guys helped me a lot. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I got a lot of suggestions. I got some information on the equivalents, European equivalents. I found a site that actually had them all and they're on their way. But that doesn't mean that one can just sit and wait. I hate sitting and waiting for components. I'm tired of doing that. I do it a lot. So I went ahead and took this as far as I could, just with the hope that those tubes won't take too long to get here, and I believe they won't. So that when they do arrive, I'll have this thing ready to do some real testing and get some real results. Get this thing to become a radio rather than, yeah, something that does draw current but makes very little noise. So if this sort of thing is interesting to you, stick around and enjoy the video. I'm going to do a quick check of the output transformer just to make sure that it's working. And the way I do that is connect a signal generator. I'll connect the ground to the chassis, and I'll connect the signal to the anode pin of the tube, which is pin 2, and without a tube in there, of course, with no power. And we'll see if we hear anything. All I'm doing is connecting the signal across the primary. Yes. Okay, that's quite a high amplitude, but we just put the amplitude of the signal generator where we want to. And of course, it's working. Good, I'm glad that's not blown. Next, I'm going to power this on, and I'm going to check the voltage, some of the voltages on the output tube. Now what I've done is I've sort of made a DIY plug, socket-plug on here. It's just some coils of wire. This is in hot glue. It's pretty rudimentary, but it works. And it'll hold that slide back when I put this in. And I'm going to check the voltage on the grid because I've got a feeling this capacitor is probably leaking like crazy. So let me switch this on and see what we get there. Oh dear. That's not good. Okay. That thing is leaking like crazy. It's leaking DC voltage from the anode of the previous tube to the grid of that tube, and it's obviously blocking that tube off. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut that capacitor off, and I'm going to see if that voltage goes down. Okay, what I've done is I've literally just snipped that off. Now all we should have here from the grid of the output tube to ground is the grid bias resistor. Let me switch that on again. See if that stays down. I think it's supposed to be, according to the American schematic for the RCA version someone pointed me to, it's actually supposed to be about 1 volt, which is what it's showing us here. It's a good indication. All right, so that thing is leaking like crazy. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to feed a signal from the signal generator through a DC blocking capacitor to that grid and see what we get, but I'm going to switch this off first. I've connected that straight to the grid. It's now not got this connected anymore. The signal's coming from the signal generator through a DC blocking capacitor. I'll put a tone on here. I'm going to give it, I don't know, let's try 1 volt RMS. I don't really know what the amplitude of the audio signal is required there, but I'm going to switch it on again. The signal is on. Let's see if we hear anything. Yes, I can hear it. Let me put it up a bit more. Okay, that's at 7 volts RMS. That's pretty high. But that means, okay, brilliant. Put that off. I'm feeling a lot better now. I was getting a bit despondent. A lot of you have helped me with sources for these tubes. My problem isn't sourcing it or even paying for it. It's the time that it takes to get things to the island. As some of you have found when you send me stuff, it takes ages to get stuff over here. And I really don't like stopping projects for that long. The point is, it seems that the output tube is actually working. I am not sure whether the gain is correct because I was feeding 7 volts RMS to the grid straight on there. Now that is replacing the signal that would normally come from the preamp tube through this capacitor, which is leaking. However, I don't know what amplitude signal would be expected to come from that capacitor or through that capacitor. So the point is, I've now determined that the output transformer is fine and that the output tube is working to a degree. So I'm going to start replacing caps in this audio section, go back to the preamp section, and hopefully we'll be able to touch the volume pot, and that should give us the signal coming out there, the big buzz that I was looking for earlier on. All right, feeling a lot better now. Well, nothing has changed and a lot has changed. Let me tell you what's happened. This is a few days after that last experiment of mine that I've just shown you, and what I decided to do first is to try and get some tubes, because I'm sure that some, if not all of them, have got a problem. They do not have a problem with the heaters, and the way I know that is because I took this wire and desoldered it from the switch over there. This is what comes from the main supply to provide the 7 point something volts for the heaters. And I've got this obviously on mains, so that switch would connect that point to the heater source. Now, what I wanted to determine is whether the heaters are drawing the right amount of current and whether they're displaying the right amount of voltage. And so what I decided to do was remove this and replace the heater supply with my regulated and current limited power supply. I put it at, 7.8 volts, something like that, adding up all the tubes. I put a current limit of 50 milliamps, which is what the tubes require, and this thing is perfect. It is actually exhibiting 50 milliamp draw at 7.8 volts. So the heaters are not a problem. However, everything else seems to have a problem. So what I decided to do was just to replace everything I could while I got the tubes. And I was fortunate. A lot of you gave me pointers to where I could get the tubes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Really appreciate it. One link was especially useful, electrontubes.nl. I checked the website. They've got all the tubes. They had all the tubes that I needed. I placed an order and they're on their way already. So I want to thank you guys for pointing me in the right direction, and I want to thank electrontubes.nl for being so fast in sending my order. The price was not exorbitant, it was fair, and I should be getting that in a couple of days or 3 or 4 days after this video goes up. So what I decided to do, just so that I wouldn't have to stop this project, is I decided to replace or check components and replace the paper capacitors. As you can see, I changed to this type or this format of film cap because I wanted to make sure that I had as much space in here as possible. Some of these were quite difficult to get hold of or get into. There are 3 in a row. And so, yeah, these guys are also film caps. They're the Panasonic type. They're 630 volts, and they've worked very well for me in the past. So those have all been replaced, and they were in pretty bad shape. The other thing I noticed is the resistors. A lot of the resistors were in pretty bad shape as well, but I had to be careful because a lot of these resistors don't match the ones that were in here, regardless of their value. Their markings don't match the exact values on the schematic that I've got. And I've come to understand that there are a lot of versions of this. There's the American version. RCA made one first, I think it was, even before Philips. And then I think everybody made these. Somebody said they're called lunchbox. If you look at the enclosure, you'll understand why they gave it that name. So I checked a lot of the resistors. There are still 1 or 2 that I haven't actually checked here, but I'd probably need to desolder them and make sure that they are the right value, or at least within spec. Everything I replaced here was out of spec. You can see some here. These, although they look small, they're 600 milliwatts. They used to have a quarter watt in there, so it's not a problem. Down there, you see that I've put 2 together. They wanted 250K. So I had to do a little bit of finagling to get the right values, but that's not a problem. I also had to make sure that all the components that I put in there do not come out of this plane, because this has got that cover that goes on here. The other thing I did was I replaced the electrolytics. And here what I did was I left the electrolytics in there. The positive pin of the electrolytic is a very good solder point, so I just cut off all connection to ground and between the two. I've left them in place and I've put these capacitors there to replace them. These are the same values, or 22 for 20 and 100 for 100. A lot higher voltage, much smaller. You can hardly see them. They were over there behind, and there's another one over here on the right. But I left the big ones in place because this thing would really look completely empty if I took them out. So I guess I was trying to keep the look as original as possible, although you can tell it's been messed with. But this is where I am at the moment. I've tried to connect a signal. As you can see, I realized that you have to actually put the front end connected to the antenna inputs here, because that coil at the front is a very important part of the front end RF tuning. And if you don't have that, if you just put a signal generator or a dummy antenna or an antenna here, it will not have the same tuning capabilities as this thing would. So I put this in place. Nothing, absolutely nothing. There's no oscillator action, nothing at all. However, as I said, the voltages seem to be sort of okay. I think something here is really awry with one or more of the tubes, as I've mentioned. Now, if I show you the schematic and what's been done, you'll see that this thing is totally painted up. This is what my schematic looks like at the moment. And as is obvious, a lot of things needed work. A lot of components are different to what the schematic tells me there should be, and I've made some note on there. There's part of the schematic that's not present at all. This feedback network's not present at all. The bottom of the volume pot, instead of going to this feedback, goes straight to ground. It should work, it shouldn't be a problem. And yeah, everything everything is looking like it's going to be painted up sooner or later. Some of these very small capacitors, things like that, are picofarad capacitors. Those are micas. I believe they're fine. Some of them I've actually removed one connection and tested them. What I would do is, as I go to a particular point like here, I would check that one or replace that one. I'd be there, so I'd remove one leg of the resistor, test the resistor. This one was actually okay, strangely enough, and then change that capacitor and so on. So every time I desoldered a particular contact point, I would do as much as I could on that contact point, on that solder point, so I wouldn't have to come and massacre it again in the future. But yeah, this is what it looks like so far. And of course, what I need to do is get these tubes, because if I got these tubes and I knew they were working, I could start what I want to do, which is get this one. This has already been fully checked. This one is practically been fully checked. Is that part outstanding? But I could obviously feed a signal into here, which is what I want to do, the wiper, and it should go through there. It should go through the triode of that tube. It should be passed on, the signal should be passed on to the grid of that tube, and I should hear it. Because when I put a signal here, without this capacitor in place, we heard it on the speakers. Admittedly, not very loud, but again, it could have to do with the speaker that I was using. I was using the workshop speaker and not the original speaker. That might be more sensitive. So that's where I am. And I've got the service manual in two versions now. See, here's the one for the 148. It's actually the Philips Radio Player 148. It gives all the details that I've referred to in the past, but these components don't all match. A lot of these are different, including capacitors, are different to what is actually in the radio. And what I've replaced them with is not with these values, but actually with the values that are in the radio itself. If this thing worked before, I want it to work again. So that is what I have for the 148, but I've got another one. This is the manual for a version that somebody pointed me to, told me it's about the same. It's the RCA version. And again, same tubes. This is exactly the same tube set that we've got here. It gives us more details on how to remove this, and there is a very important issue with this particular one. It's a hot chassis radio, so these insulating washers are very important. We don't have that problem with ours because we've actually got a proper isolation transformer there. But again, this version here has a few differences, as you can see, but it's actually very useful to be able to compare. You see, you've got battery, you've got the main power going straight in through there, and it's rectified with a selenium rectifier. So 117 or 115 volts is supplied, and the one leg of that goes to the ground. So you've got to be careful. This is a hot chassis. Unfortunately, ours is not, but it does give us more information than our one does. For example, it tells us what voltages you should get at each of the tube heater pins. It also tells us what voltages you should get here. Now this is slightly misleading because it says 1.5, but if you follow the signal line here, it goes through to there, to the plate. And where else does it go? It goes down here. Oh, there we go. It comes here from this point at the bottom of the volume control. So it doesn't actually go to ground over here. And therefore, there's obviously a DC voltage over here. Otherwise, that should be 0. All these guys here should be 0. Okay? Except one, which is actually grid leak biased. But the point is, it's very useful to have this information because you can then make comparisons. What this means is that I've actually done everything I can without the tubes. And as soon as they arrive, I have to be careful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to replace just the two audio section tubes. I know that the heaters are working well on all of them. And what I need for those two to work is I just need to make sure that the heater current is going through. So I won't replace everything. I'll do it one step at a time. First the audio, and then I'll go back to the radio sections. We'll be able to see if the oscillator is working here with a sniffer coil onto the oscilloscope, and so on and so forth. And so this is as far as I can get to today, bar a few more resistors that I need to check. It really is a disaster in here in terms of component values. But anyway, I guess that's to be expected. 1952 radio. What was I looking for? So I hope this has been slightly interesting for you. And if it has, click like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz. And if you want to support the channel directly, you can do so on Patreon. Thanks for watching. Bye for now, and stay safe.